This report focuses on the experiences of a witness who has had frequent and ongoing possible interactions with something in the woods here in Losco County. The area around this report contains the Au Sable State Forest, containing 138 miles of the Au Sable River, as well as the Huron National Forest. The Manistee Forests were incorporated in 1945 and contain almost 1 million square miles and nearly 6,000 acres of collective wetlands. A casual look at the map of Michigan shows that the Manistee and Huron are not connected, but they share a vast array of rivers, swamps, and wildlife. I've been in contact with the witness, Mrs. R., and we have shared recordings and discussed similar experiences. Miss R. wrote down her experiences, and I have decided to present them here in her very own words. There were a few times when I deleted a place that might have been too descriptive, or otherwise altered the narrative, but the great majority of the work is directly from the witness. My experiences happened in removed where I grew up. There's a lot of swampland and hundreds of acres of private and state areas out that way, especially upon growing up. My family owned a front 40 acres and a back 40 acres, which I eventually personally bought upon adulthood. My grandparents lived just down the road from us on their own ranch, also with plenty of acreage. Incidentally, I have a brother who had experiences on my grandfather's property that he told me. I always had horses, and I was the only one in my family who rode them. The horses would sometimes act spooked in the woods, and I would pass it off as horsey behavior. But it seemed to go on like this for years. I, myself, also had these spooky feelings in the woods when I was little. These feelings got a lot worse out in the back 40. It was really eerie out there, much more densely wooded. The only opening in the back 40 was an old pioneer homestead, which consisted of an indentation in the ground. My grandfather told me that it was where the old barn had been at one time. A few broken pieces of pottery, a bunch of lilac bushes, and an apple orchard. Only when I was an adult in my 30s and watching TV one night that these eerie things finally made some sense. The first time that the eeriness seemed real was when I was about 9. So, in 1978-ish, I was walking with my girlfriend, neighbor, out in the back 40. She was about 4 years older than me and much taller. Something growled really loud at us, and it was extremely scary. We picked up our pace as we're headed back from the front pasture. We didn't say much to each other, but just kept up a fast walk. We breathed a sigh of relief when we get to the front 40 and cross the gate into that pasture. We were in about 200 feet when something growled and then shrieked at us. How could it have kept up with us without us hearing it? My friend turned to look and stated, "Oh God," and grabbed the collar of my shirt, took off running down the trail with me in tow. We didn't stop until we reached the open barnyard and then the house. She was almost crying and then went home. I'm not sure what she saw, and we never talked about it. Just about how scary the walk was in the woods that day. Just a couple of times, but not to anyone else. She would never go for a walk with me out there again, and I have never seen or heard from her after she moved away. So anyway, through the years, I got so used to these feelings that I would just shrug them off. I would have the feeling of something following me, but I wasn't scared anymore. I used to see things out of the corner of my eye when I was younger, and I was so sure that something had been there. But then I couldn't see it. It was like things just disappeared behind trees or something like that. I knew it was nonsense, so eventually, I learned to just desensitize myself from spooks and learned to just enjoy the ride and my horse. Occasionally, people would go four-wheeling with their trucks, but for the most part, it was very quiet during the summers. I would ride my horses quite often out there from ages 9 to 17. There's a little-known route that a person could ride all the way through. I cannot count or come close to figuring out how many times that I had thought I had seen things, like dark shadows, or even heard small footsteps that just did not belong. Everyone knows that deer have 4 legs and small hard feet, creating a very distinct tap, tap, tap as it walks through the woods. No animal out there that I know of can resemble the sound of a very heavy human walking. At other times, I would hear absolutely no noise at all, but see dark motions among the trees in my peripheral. I would turn my head around and see nothing. So, eventually, I moved away. Then, come 1994, I bought the back 40 on a land contract. I believe it would have been the summer of 95 that my boyfriend and I decided to camp out at the back 40. We had a campfire and slept in a tent. In the middle of the night, we awoke to the sound of tree knocks, although at the time, I had no clue as to what exactly a tree knock was. My husband, having grown up in the country, also was startled. The sound can be described as this. Take a heavy, dry but solid branch, about 4 inches in diameter, and beat it as hard as you can into a live tree, at least a foot in diameter. Do this a total of 4 times, but leaving about 2 seconds between each knock. I asked my boyfriend, "What was that?" And he said, "I don't know." I could tell he was scared, and that made me even more frightened. We laid awake for most of the remainder of the night. In 1997, we paid off the property in full and decided we would put up a house in the Orchid and move out of there. Getting there was not easy. It was the fall of 97 that I woke up one day to find my entire electric horse fence demolished on the west side. I looked over the horses carefully, but not one of them had a single scratch on them, let alone any cuts. Carefully, but it was strange. Weird. It was 3 strands of heavy-gauge steel wiring. Where it was knocked down was right on the edge of a wild blackberry patch. So, inside of the fence, you had apple trees, blackberry bushes, briars, thorns, and then fencing. I'm not sure exactly when it was, but it must have been sometime in the summer-fall of 97. This is when I heard the wood knocks again. We did not have air conditioning in that house, so the windows were open. I was home alone and I could hear the knocking. It was near the west side of the house. I called my one brother, who was an avid hunter, and asked him, "What makes a wood banging knocking noise out here in the woods? Kind of like 2 heavy wooden baseball bats being hit together." He told me it was just coon hunters trying to get the coons out of the trees. It was also in the fall of 97 that I noticed a dead animal smell coming from the end of the lane at the mailbox. Upon looking, I found 4 dead deer that had been there and leaves piled on top. After a week of investigating, I learned that the Hopewell Road Commission had been using the private lane for years and years as a dumping ground for roadkill. The last thing that ever happened was the 4th of July in 2003. My family had all gone to see the fireworks in town, but I decided to stay at my parents' house. It was a hectic day as all my brothers and their families were also visiting my parents for the holiday. I was sitting peacefully on my parents' back deck, and I could hear the fireworks in town, far off in the distance, right behind my parents' home. I heard something crash through the woods, whooping like a crazy drunk man. Why is he running through the woods in the dark? Doesn't he have anyone to visit or be with right now? How is he going to find his way back through all that forest? Why would he even be this far out in the woods this late at night? My name is Alan. On about mid-November 2012, I had a very unusual experience that, at first, kept me very mixed up, but always stayed in my mind until I started doing research. It was about 2 to 3 a.m. in the morning. I awoke to go outside and have a smoke. The area of the town of Bath, New York, is semi-rugged. Hundreds of huge foothills. There is vast amounts of forests, lakes, ponds, wildlife, and many state parks. Much of the land is posted no hunting. The hills are also super steep, so climbing or hiking can be difficult. We rented out the full basement apartment of a home. Our entryway was in the back of the home semi-underground. There was a deck over our entryway. I am an ex-US Army intel, a special tasking veteran who served in Central America and the Middle East. I'm telling you this because I am a trained observer and weigh out everything I see. I am super aware of my surroundings. That morning, I went outside, lit up a cigarette. It was very dark this night and cool. Deer would constantly wander through, and many times I could be 10 feet from a deer and be silent as to not spook them. As I lit up my smoke, movement caught my attention about roughly 100 yards directly in front of me to the east. A cinnamon brownish colored figure was pacing back and forth over and over. On each side of this set, there's this clear cut and a couple of homes. This thing was at the far end by the next tree line, pacing back and forth, moving towards the last home, and back again, moving approximately north to south, then back the other way. It was moving erratically, pacing like it was confused or undecided if it wanted to go closer. As I looked at first, I thought, was it drunk? But in all the years I've lived there, I have never seen anybody out there. As I watched, what really caught my attention was that it looked like it was floating across the ground, as there was absolutely no head bob at all. The ground rose between myself and this entity and went back down to its side, so I could not see the lower legs good. It kept on pacing back and forth for maybe 3 minutes. At the position I was under, in the shadows, I was not observed by this creature, thankfully. I'm not afraid of too much, but for some reason, the hair stood up on the back of my neck, and I got into what I call combat mode. I wanted to bellow out at this entity, but something said to not do that. Around 3 to 4 minutes of this thing pacing, I turned my head for a second. Bam! It's gone. I got a fearful sense of where this thing went, and had a feeling it might try to flank me around the 2 homes. So, I went into the house and awakened my wife, and I told her, "There's something weird out there." I did not think of Bigfoot right away, because it was not the Patty type I seen on the Patterson and Gimli film. I also thought that they're in the Northwest, not really here in New York State. It was maybe 7 feet tall, a much slimmer build, white on top and slimmer than Patty. More like a fine-tuned athlete than a bodybuilder. Long arms and an awfully long shaggy head of hair, which stood out to me too. Very weird. The reason I even saw it was because there was a light on that home as he was pacing towards, and that lit it up, and some of the other area. Upon seeing it, after the fact, I realized that there was a hedgerow running parallel to it, and a large ravine behind that ran into the woods. Across from this property was a road, a couple mobile homes, then a very steep wooded foothill, or a small mountain. For years this has baffled me, and I cannot get this out of my mind until I visited the BFRO and seen at least 6 reports entirely around this whole area. I was letting my dogs out to go to the bathroom before leaving for work. It was about 3:30 a.m. I drive an hour to work and get there by 5, so that's why I was up so early. All was quiet and peaceful. Heard an owl off in a tree line. Then, about 5 minutes later, I hear, off in the distance, Something I never heard before. I hear coyotes all the time, and I've heard a bobcat screaming before. But this was far different. It sounded like it was quite always off, whatever it was, but sounded very big, very deep. The only way I could think to explain the noise was like a big, burly man yelling, "Ah!" for about 5 to 10 seconds long. Then nothing else. It caused a neighbor dog down the road to start barking, but did not seem to faze my dogs. That direction the noise came from is about 2 to 3 miles of a combination of timber and farmland, then becomes a big river bottom of the Grand River. I don't think whatever made the noise was 2 to 3 miles away, maybe a mile. I have never heard anything like that before in my life, and believe me, I've been an outdoors guy my whole life. I've watched multiple different Bigfoot shows, heard vocalizations on them, and that is the closest thing I can think of is what it sounded like. However, I feel like recorded things on TV don't properly give you the same feel or power this thing seemed to have. I mean, it sent chills down my spine. If it would have been closer, I definitely would have gone inside for a gun. This happened in Plain, Washington, right on the Chihuahua River Road. My name, you can just call me Nelson. I stay and live here in a travel trailer at Thousand Trails, Leavenworth, Washington. However, the resort is 18 miles away from Leavenworth, outside of Plain. I was awoken by a sound. No clue what woke me, but with it being Memorial Day weekend and many in the campground, I just assumed it was somebody being loud and it woke me. I didn't really hear what woke me, so I laid my head back down on the pillow. About 3 minutes later, I heard something, but I was already awake and sat up in my bed, listening. My first thought, it was a Bigfoot or a yell. It seemed so distant but so filling of the entire forest and valley. I said to myself, nah, it must be some humans partying or yelling at a cabin on a hill, or in another section of the campground. Then, within another 30 seconds, another one while I was still sitting up. Head by the open window, in complete darkness. No other human noise. Quiet time and all are sleeping, and no human could possibly make this noise, as we simply cannot transmit what I will call depth and broadness of that kind of distance. It felt like it was coming miles away, but it wasn't directional. This howl could penetrate walls or obstructions, it felt like. This was beyond weird, unsettling, while still kind of exciting. Anyhow, that's what I heard. Also, I noticed I believed I'd seen footprints in the snow just this last winter. I did take a photo, but not sure if I still have it, since I changed phones, so hoping backup in cloud does. This is to document my experience on Sunday, June 6, 2021, in Hoopa, California, right alongside Shoemaker Road, Cherry Flat Road. Something woke me up from dreaming. I was dreaming and I was trying to sleep, but there was noise outside, so in my dream, I get out of bed, went to my window, and pulled back the curtain. I began tapping on the window to let whoever was outside know they were being too noisy and disrupting my effort to try and sleep. After my third tap on the window, I woke up from my dream, realized I had to go to the bathroom. I get up, made my way to the toilet. My bedroom window was open, and my bathroom window was open. Just before I flushed, I hear a faint noise. I begin to think it was a motorcycle coming around the bend on the highway, and in that second, I thought to myself, who would be riding a motorcycle this early in the morning? Then, the noise got louder and drawn out, and had a deep vibrating howl. Then it stopped. I realized then that it was something I have never heard before, and it was not human. It sounded like it was on one of the mountains far beyond my house. Anyway, I noticed there were no dogs barking, not even my dogs, and there weren't even crickets. It was dead silence. I was telling myself, did I hear what I think I heard? I headed back to bed and noticed the clock said 3:33 a.m. I asked my husband if he was awake. He had been snoring when I was in the bathroom. I told him, I had just heard something. I explained the sound to him, and I said, I think it's a Bigfoot. I could not believe what I had heard. I could not sleep for over an hour, and we laid in bed, waiting for more howling, but there was none. The next day when I told everybody in the house, nobody had heard it. Later that Sunday morning, I used my phone to Google different animal sounds to try and find the same howl that I heard. I tried it all. Mountain lion, wolf, fisher, fox. None of them are in the least bit similar. Then, I Googled Bigfoot howls. The 1994 Ohio moaning howl is almost exactly what I heard. I got chills when I listened to it. I played the recording to my household, and my oldest adult son recognized the sound also. He as well has a few of his friends, and they have their own experiences too, including but not limited to a rock being thrown. He has the rock in his bedroom. I phoned my other family members, told them what I experienced, and my mom. She told me there was a post on Facebook about a week ago from somebody that lives a few blocks away. They were returning home late at night near the local dump between Hoopa and Willow Creek. Apparently, she thought she saw something near the highway, and so did the car behind her, as the other car turned around and drove back. This location is only a couple of mountains away from where my home is located. I figured the Bigfoot traveled to Hoopa from the dump site. I have lived in this area, Hoopa, California, almost my entire life, and I have never heard such a howl. I think about the experience almost daily, but I actually feel fortunate to have witnessed this rare creature howling. While living with my parents at Manton, California, in the years of 1987 to 1989, we began hearing strange howls intermittently from around 9 p.m. to midnight, roughly 2 to 3 times a week. My father said that their crazy neighbor must have gotten hold of an old World War II air raid siren. I think he said so that as to not scare the kids. It was definitely not the local volunteer fire department siren. Not until several years later did we happen to hear a recording of the infamous Ohio howl. Exactly the same sound. It made the hair on the back of my neck stand on end to recognize it. My husband and grown children also recognized it too, and said, "That's the sound we used to hear at Manton." Looking back, I realized the sound came from a cleared swath, going up the hill along the penstock of the power lines. At the time, not many people lived in the area, so overloaded with wildlife, game, cougars, and water. I also noticed that several years later, there was a large wildfire in the same area. A friend's daughter was on the mop-up fire crew. Her mother told me she had mentioned seeing a monkey up in a pine tree. I told her it was not a monkey, and yes, they are there. During a little camping trip along the North Fork of the Coeur River, we had recently finished dinner. While sitting fireside our dogs, a border collie and a pug leapt up and ran into the forest that separated the campsite from the creek. Neither made any sound, but simply ran into the woods at twilight. Frustrated at the thought of chasing dogs in the woods at night, I retrieved my flashlight from the cab of my truck. Upon approaching the tree line, the dogs exploded out of the woods and ran to the truck, where they then cowered in fear, staring off into the trees. My initial fear was we were dealing with a cougar, or much more serious, a bear. I quickly retrieved my pistol from the console, instructing my girlfriend to put more wood on the fire. We managed to get the dogs out of the canopied bed where they had taken shelter and placed them into a spare tent. I approached the forest. While scanning the trees with my flashlight, I caught sight of a large black Sasquatch standing behind a tree approximately 30 feet in front of me. I retreated back away from the woods and, after a few moments, sat in my chair, flashlight and pistol in lap. Initially, the hope was that it would simply go away. My girlfriend was sitting about 4 feet away, and after shouting into the forest that I was armed and would shoot if threatened, a large rock, 8 inches long and 5 inches wide, I still have the rock, came tumbling out of the trees and went between us, grazing the top of the fire as it passed, causing hot coals and sparks to fly against my dining canopy. We both jumped up out of surprise, while trying to keep an eye on the forest. I was then able to extinguish the hot coals, burning the grass and canopy with an open soda. Out of fear and disgust, I fired 2 rounds from the revolver into the air at a 45-degree angle. The creature then moved off to our left, crunching undergrowth as it moved, then stopped. We heard a large crack-like sound. It was that of a tree snapping. Then, the creature moved off to the right, where it crossed the creek, at this point where I had originally seen it. It made 2 loud splashes in the water, moving to the opposite shore where it was heard to be moving noisily up the hillside, opposite our camp. We hastily gathered our more expensive gear, tossing it into the truck, leaving our tents, coolers, and other various items. We put the dogs in the cab, extinguished the fire, and abandoned camp. 45 minutes home to Coeur d'Alene, returning the following morning to retrieve the remainder of our equipment. I found the large stone and kept it. We also discovered the tree snap was actually a twin pine, about 5 inches in diameter, that was also broken about 6 feet up from the ground. No prints were seen as the ground was packed hard due to heavy use that summer. The creek was also running high. A follow-up investigation report was done. I spoke to the witness by phone. The witness and his girlfriend both set up camp with a spare tent as more people were to come later in the camping trip. The only other camp was 1/4 mile away. They had cooked steaks and oysters for dinner. When the dogs came running back from the trees, they were whimpering. The witness had his flashlight on, figured for at least 2 seconds, and knew it was not a bear. It was leaning out from behind an approximately 2-foot diameter pine tree. He saw the right side of the upper body. The lower body was covered by bushes. He estimates the shoulder width at 4 feet based on the tree diameter. The right arm hung down into the bushes, so no hand was seen. It was 8 feet tall, with smooth, shiny black hair, about 3 inches long. The head was conical, with no neck. The nose was broad, not a bare snout. Hair from the head hung down to the eyes. No ears or teeth were seen. No eyeshine either. The skin on the face was black. No foul odor was detected. He used the words bulky and enormous to describe this figure. When the rock was thrown, it hits the sticks in the fire, sparks landing on the side of the dining canopy. He stated he would never shoot at it, but shot into the air, and they continued to hear it move around, and also a tree break. The entire encounter was about 45 minutes. He and his girlfriend were very frightened, even though he felt it would not harm them. It affected him for a long time, and he has since been sharing the encounter of the past couple of years. I was deer hunting off Highway 24 near Rhodestown, North Carolina, right outside of Jacksonville. I had been in my stand since about 3 that afternoon. It was close to dark, and I saw a deer walking along the edge of the clearing that I was in. It kept looking into the woods like it was curious of something. This deer got closer, and I took the shot. When I did, it took off running, hit some brush, and fell down. I waited about 30 minutes, and it got up. That's when it started getting dark. I got out of my stand, went to go get the deer. I got my things together and started dragging my deer to my truck. This was roughly a quarter mile through a thick part of woods that I was hunting in. I was carrying my rifle, backpack, the deer, and a flashlight in my mouth. So this way, I could pull the deer by its leg, hold my rifle and backpack straps. After walking through the thick part of the woods, it was a straight shot to my truck. I dropped the deer's leg to get situated and get myself together to continue my walkout. When I looked up, with my light still in my mouth, I saw two eyes looking back at me. They looked wider than any animal I had ever seen at night. I've been hunting all my life. I have also seen everything from deer to coyote to bear. These set of eyes were about my height. I'm 5'10". The trail I was on was slightly downhill. This thing stared at me long enough for me to put my rifle and backpack down. I had a 9mm Glock with me, and I pulled it out. I shot once into the ground next to me to get whatever it was to get out of the trail. It did not move or flinch. It just simply looked to its left and looked back to me. I looked down to take a knee because I was getting worried. I got on my knee, looked back up, and it walked off to its left, into some of the thickest woods I have seen. I grabbed the deer, continued dragging it towards my truck. When I got to the spot where I thought I saw the eyes, I looked to both sides of the trail, and I swear, I could smell this musky, foul odor, and where it had walked off the trail. Tree limbs and trees were pushed over, as if something huge had just barged through the thicket. I went to my truck, cleaned the deer out there in the woods, like another post on here that I read. I felt like I was watched the whole time I was cleaning the deer. I left the ribcage and spine of the deer I cleaned out there, along with the hide. When I came back to the same spot, the spine had been drug off, about 300 yards from where I left it. It was easily one of the strangest and creepiest nights I have ever had in the woods by myself. I experienced this incident while living on a military base in North Carolina. I was approximately 14 or 15 years old at the time. I'm 50 now. However, the incident is still fresh in my memory. At the time, there was nothing for a young boy to do. So, my favorite pastime was wandering the military res, searching for discarded sea rations, as we never had enough to eat in the house. There were 8 people in my family. One day, I skipped school to go sea ration hunting. I'll never forget it. It was very warm and sunny, which for North Carolina is not unusual for a fall day. We used to call it an Indian summer. I had been wandering the deeper recesses of the res and was quite proud of the fact that not only had I stumbled across an old farmstead that the Marine Corps had condemned in order to take the land, but had a pretty good supply of discarded sea rations. Realizing it was getting late, I had better get home. I had a tank trail made by the Marines for the vehicles to use. I was getting closer to home, so I decided to leave the trail and shortcut it through the woods. I knew this particular area and always avoided it because it was known as a Pocosin, which in local terms meant an area that is real dense and swampy. As I made my way, something really seemed out of the ordinary. All day, I was used to hearing the sounds of the forest. Birds, frogs, squirrels, chattering and whatnot was great. Not seeing another human being. Now I was quiet. It did not seem so natural. Something made me stop, and to this very day, I am perplexed about this. I don't know why, because at that age, you have no fear, as you think you're going to live forever. I had no fear this time either. However, I felt that I was being watched. I have never had this feeling again. So, I slowly began to turn my head to the right when I caught a glimpse of something brown. My first thought was, oh, it's only a deer. I stood stock still, kept looking at the brown patch. It didn't move. It was in a very dense part of the Pocosin, and my second thought was maybe it's not a deer, but possibly a discarded Marine Corps field jacket. Now, that would be a treasure. As I began to move towards the object, I seemed to hear the crashing of brush first. Then, that brown patch moved, only it moved higher. I estimate a height of between 8 and 10 feet. As it grew in height, it also grew broader, exposing more of itself. I never saw its head or any real features, other than the long fur, because the thing was moving so fast that I was amazed how any animal of that size could do that. The crashing of the branches and underbrush was so loud, all I could do was stand there. I don't know how or why I remained that long in that position. All I remember is the sounds of the forest returned. That's what snapped me back to the present. I have only recalled this story once and was told never again to repeat it to anybody or go back into those woods. I have never returned to that area to this day. In early October of 1983, I was recently married and stationed at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. Neither my wife nor I had ever been to Wilmington, so one Saturday, we made a trip there. We saw some sights, did some shopping and had dinner, went to a late movie. While driving back to the camp, on US 17 just north of the town of Holly Ridge, I noticed a very large figure on the right shoulder ahead. It was walking upright and I assumed it was a bear. I slowed down in order to avoid hitting it. It should go down on all four legs and flee. I was going perhaps 10 miles an hour or less when I finally realized that what I was approaching was not a bear. The creature I saw was massive, maybe 7 to 8 feet tall, and I'd estimate 600 pounds or more. The hair was a lighter brownish color and appeared long in its length. I could see its face very clearly. What struck me at the time, and even to this day, is the creature appeared to be oblivious to its surroundings and seemed deep in thought. It never gave any indication that he was aware of the car approaching, nor did the bright headlights seem to cause it any discomfort. It just kept moving around at a slow pace, looking straight ahead. I finally passed the creature at nearly walking speed. I assumed I had to have been mistaken or could not have seen what I thought, so I stopped the car. I looked back out the rear window and can see the creature still walking southbound in the glow of the stop lamps of the car. I woke up my wife and had her look. She did look, but said it just must have been a bear. At that point, I let it go, resumed my northbound trip back to Jacksonville. One other thing is to note that my impression was the creature was clean in the sense that its hair was not matted, nor in tufts. The hair was straight and laid flat against its body. It seemed to vary in length from a couple of inches to maybe 5. There was no hair on the face, which was a bit lighter in complexion than the fur surrounding it. My wife, who was sleeping in the passenger seat of the car, is the only witness, and I woke her up just after passing. She could see the figure in the brake lights, but explained it had to have been a bear. A follow-up investigation was done. I interviewed the witness, observer, by phone on January 9th, 2012. This sighting occurred at approximately 1 a.m. on Sunday, October 2nd, 1983. The weather being clear, dry, and temperature in the mid-60s. Observer and his wife recalled driving north on North Carolina 17, approximately 1 to 2 miles past the town of Holly Ridge, when they approached what the witnesses initially thought was a large bear. Illuminated in the car headlights, the witness clearly remembers a massive, hairy, bipedal animal walking south on the right shoulder of the road, in opposition to his direction of travel. Length of observation time was about 15 seconds. Witness describes the animal's height in the range of 7 to 8 feet tall, with weight estimated at 600 pounds. Hair color was brown, with reddish highlights and about 2 inches or more in length. He slowed his vehicle to a crawl and was able to observe most of the upper body features, particularly the face, very clearly. He recalls it as different from an ape's face, more elongated, hairless around the eyes and cheeks. Facial skin was described as reddish, chocolate-colored, and lighter than surrounding hair. No beard or other lengthy head hair was detected. The head was large, sloped back to the top, and the forehead area between the brow line and top of the head estimated to about 6 to 7 inches. The brow was hair-covered and very prominent. The eyes were darker, elliptical-shaped, and fixed forward. The nose was hairless, but not massive or wide. Nostrils were visible. The mouth was wide and hairless. The neck was not prominent. An observer described the head as blending into the shoulders. He describes the body as stocky, somewhat muscular, and shoulder to shoulder, measurement was thought to be approximately 3 feet wide. The torso was hair-covered, and chest muscles not overly prominent. No female breasts were observed, thus leaving witness with the opinion that this was a male animal. Animals were described as hair-covered, excessively long and extended to the animal's knees. Hands were described as balled up and hairless. Clenched hands were darker color than the face. No finger length estimate or nail description could be accurately recalled. Thighs were described as muscular, about twice the girth of an adult human. Observer did not remember any details of the lower legs or feet. No odor was detected, although the windows of the car were rolled up during the event. The observer also states that during his experience, the animal simply ignored the car, was unaffected by the headlights or occupants, and continued moving south as if it were on a mission. Its gaze remained forward as it moved past his vehicle, never turning its head to look in any other direction. The witness states that the animal moved in a moderate walking pace. Its arms were swinging in a normal biped manner. It issued no vocalizations, made no audible footfalls, nor could he hear it breathing. It did not appear to be injured or carrying any visible items. No other travelers were on the road during this experience. His wife was asleep in the passenger seat and did not observe the animal. The witness was not threatened during the event. In fact, he remembers feeling amazed, mesmerized, and unafraid of this huge animal. I've never told this to anyone because I didn't want to hear the jokes, but it was mid-July, 1987. I was heading toward the beach in my sports car, top-down music blasting. It was around 8:45 p.m., so it was still light out, sort of dusk. I had my headlights on, cruising at about 60 miles an hour. Right when I rounded a corner, there in the road stood this large, hairy thing. I slammed on the brakes, swerving around it. I must have glanced it because it bounced over the passenger side of my car. I slid the car around, stopped where my headlights were, about halfway on the thing. It got up and came at me. I was about 25 feet away from the thing, and the smell was atrocious. It hung in the air like a wet blanket. It was away from this thing, and the smell was awful, like I said. It was about 7 to 7.5 feet high, reddish brown, matted looking hair. The face was hairless, and he looked ticked. I quickly put the car in reverse, backed up, threw the car in drive, taking off. As I was spinning around, I quickly looked in the rearview mirror, and it was right on my car's rear end. I hear a loud bang. About that time, my car traction and I took off. I left the creature running down the road after me. I've never been so scared in all my life. After I got to my destination, I checked my vehicle. The passenger rear quarter panel was dented in with hair on it. My rear spoiler was shattered where it had hit the rear of my car. I told my friends, family, police, and insurance that I had hit a stray cow. But it took weeks to get that smell off the outside of my car, and the inside still had that same putrid stench. It was an undersmell, like sewage and something really foul. I was 27 then. I'm 38 now. I have not been down that road since, and I will drive 45 to 50 miles out of my way not to go that route. My husband and I live in Florida, in Hillsborough County, next to the wildlife preserve. One day, about 2 weeks ago, we were traveling on Highway 301, and I saw a sign that said Dead River. I glanced to look at the river, as this was in broad daylight. What I saw, I'll never forget. I didn't even believe in Bigfoot before this, and I saw a big, white, furry animal standing straight up like a human, crossing over the stream. We were traveling fast on the road, so we couldn't just stop. I told my husband I just saw an animal, as I was in shock about what I had seen. He didn't see it because he was driving. It took me 2 days to realize I had just seen a Bigfoot. I think I was in shock about what I'd seen. Also, where I saw it, it was very close to our RV park, River Palm. When we entered the park, there was this horrific smell. Did not connect the two things at the time, but some say they smell rotten. Don't know if it was connected to the incident or not. No witnesses, just me getting a quick glance. It was around 2 p.m. as well. There was also a follow-up investigation report by a person by the name of R. Monteith. The witness and her husband had recently just moved to Florida. On Tuesday, November 20th, 2018, they were returning from the store at approximately 2 p.m., heading north on Highway 301, a 2-lane road in Thonotosasa. It was a sunny day with a high of 77. Now the speed limit on 301 is 60, but they were slowing down as their turn was less than a quarter mile away. She was the passenger, and as they passed over Two Hole Branch Creek, she noticed this large bipedal figure that was white off to the right, and it appeared to be stepping over the creek, heading southbound. It was standing upright, and she saw a leg in mid-step. Her sighting was a second or two, but she realized it wasn't a man. It didn't have clothes or shoes on, and it appeared to have white hair all over its body. The height of the figure was hard for her to judge, as the road is higher than the creek, and she was looking down on it. But it seemed to be similar to a large human. The head appeared rounded. Its hands were at its side. She estimated the figure to be about 20 yards from the car. It never looked at the car. It appeared to be walking confidently, with purpose. She claimed she had never thought these creatures existed. When her husband mentioned to his brother that his wife may have seen one, the brother told them of a sighting that he and his mother had at their childhood home many years ago, back in Iowa. His mother confirmed the sighting. They had seen a Bigfoot eating mulberries in the yard. The witness, Her husband and I went to the location at about the same time of her sighting. The sign she speaks of in her report, of saying Dead River, is just before the small bridge, but refers to the next road, Dead River Road, not the name of the creek. The creek is called Two Branches Creek, and it is one of the creeks that flows off the Hillsborough River. This section of Highway 301 runs right along Hillsborough State Park and the Lower Hillsborough Wilderness Preserve. There's a small bridge over the creek. The witness claims there was more water in the creek in November than the day we were there in March. This is most likely correct, as this is Florida's dry season, and the rains really don't begin until about May. This area is heavily treed. The old Atlantic Coastline Railroad used to run right along this road. In fact, remnants of it are still visible. It's about 50 yards away from the highway, where the railroad was as much higher than the surrounding forest. This Bigfoot was walking in between the old railroad and the highway. Footprints around the creek bed were deer, pig, and alligator. It is evident that many smaller animals also walk the area too. Actually, just east of this area are many strawberry fruit farms. North is a dairy farm. Following the Hillsborough River, going north leads to the Green Swamp. Heading south leads to Cypress Creek area, of which both have had numerous Bigfoot reports. First, I'll start with the fact that I have never put much stock into the Bigfoot phenomenon. I have degrees in wildlife management and wildlife biology. I have been working as a biologist for the last 17 years. I have never believed that something could exist that has never left any concrete evidence. Furthermore, nothing similar has ever been found in the fossil record that I know of, so this has led me to believe that it was all false. Until the weekend of November 24th, 2013. I'm an avid bird watcher and wildlife photographer. I take very long hikes in various wild areas around Tampa about this time of year to photograph whatever I find. I was hiking at Cypress Creek Preserve, which is in between Interstate 275 and 75, near the apex where they meet. I was walking on one of the rather wide trails, and I came to a stop due to hearing a noise. I had seen quite a few wild pigs that morning, and I thought I could photograph one crossing the trail in front of me. So I was looking down at my camera, adjusting the ISO settings, and I saw something large moving out of the corner of my eye to my left, approximately 200 feet away. As soon as I saw the movement, I looked directly at it, and it was already halfway across the trail at this point. My eyes were directly on the animal as it walked, upright, across the rest of the trail into the palmettos. It was incredibly large. I mean, at least 6 feet tall or more. Completely black in color, with a very wide chest from front to back. It was walking completely upright, with a very fast, purposeful pace. The animal was leaning forward slightly, but did not seem awkward with its steps, like a bear would be walking upright. I slowly walked over to the spot where I saw it cross, and I could still hear it moving through the woods in the distance. I then immediately noticed that all the birds around me had stopped chirping, and even the insects had stopped making noise as well. I looked for tracks or hair left on the plants in the area, but came up with nothing. I was able to get a picture of the palmetto on the trail, though, where it had crossed, and I put my tripod near it for height comparison. Just so you know, I am extremely knowledgeable about the wildlife in Florida, but I cannot explain what type of animal that I saw this time. Also, it was around 9 in the morning, overcast, about 60 degrees. There was a follow-up investigation done by R. Monteith. The witness is a biologist at a local area animal park. He has even taught college-level courses on bear and knows that what he witnessed that morning was neither bear or man. The gentleman's professional standing and occupation lead this report to be credible and very sound. The biologist went to Cypress Creek Nature Preserve in the morning to photograph birds. He saw much wildlife while hiking to a spot to set up his camera. About 1 mile into the trail, at exactly 9:04 a.m., he set up his camera tripod. While doing so, heard a noise, turned to his left, and looked. About 50 to 60 yards away from him was a Sasquatch crossing the trail. Unfortunately, the camera was pointed in the opposite direction, and he was unable to take a photo. He described a Sasquatch at more than 6 feet tall, black in color, and having a very wide torso. It was muscular in its profile, and it walked briskly across the trail, left to right, never looking in his direction. Its gait had a forward lean to it, and he described the walk as very smooth. The facial features blended into the dark face, and he was not able to see them. There were no apparent breasts or tail that he could see. The head was round, but larger than a human. He walked up to where it had been on the trail and could only hear it walking away. He noticed that the woods became quiet after the sighting. The area of this sighting is very close to my own home, as the preserve borders my property. It is a state-recognized wildlife corridor that connects the Hillsborough River and the Green Swamp in Pasco and Polk counties. We received numerous reports from both of these areas, by the way. I was able to get to the location 2 days after the event. When I get to the location of the trail crossing, I noticed several tree breaks in both directions, indicating something large had walked through. Interestingly, while I was photographing the broken branches, a tree about 25 yards away from me crashed to the ground. I ventured in that direction, singing softly, but wasn't able to detect any other movement. I got off work right around 2 a.m., back in May of 1996, and it was 2 in the morning, and I was going home. I took a left on Hopewell Road, off of Highway 39, made the left turn on the road. As I was driving, less than a minute, a car heading to me was speeding and flashing their headlight high beams. I didn't know if it was teens playing around or maybe somebody that just had a little too much to drink. So I blew it off. As I was coming to the curve, there was a fence, maybe 4 to 5 feet tall. As I was going around the curve, my headlights caught something that looked to be 3 to 4 feet taller than the fence. It looked at me with these red eyes. I felt numb, frightened. I always think about the other person that was driving that night. What did they see? The site has now been developed since then. All the trees are almost gone, and a follow-up investigation report by Caroline Curtis was done. I spoke to the witness, driving back to the location at hand. There is a creek, several mining pits or ponds, railroad tracks, orange groves, and only one house nearby. The area has not really changed dramatically in the past 10 years, though there are fewer orange trees now. The old barbed wire fence is roughly 4 feet high. What she saw possibly came from a nearby orange grove and then crossed the road. She had slowed down just before she saw the human-like figure clearing the fence to her right. It was about twice the height of the fence, and uniformly, all dark in color. When I asked about the eyes, she said this: they reminded her of a deer in the headlights, except it wasn't a deer. The color was brake light red, and seemed to be reflecting off her headlights as it looked her way. She describes the fear that came over her as a white feeling, comparing it to the sensation one has before passing out, or when you sense something really bad is about to happen. This possible sighting occurred on the edge of Four Corners, the world's largest phosphate mine, which spans 58,000 plus acres, The mining company has restored much of the stripped land to provide habitat for wildlife. Approximately 350 species of animals inhabit the restored areas, including several threatened species. What's to say a Sasquatch or a Bigfoot could not be a part of those species? Back in January of 2001, I went down to Florida with my family while my father was working there. We didn't want to stay in a hotel because we had just bought a camper, so we decided to go camping. We stayed at the Hillsborough River State Park. One day, I took my bike out around 2 p.m. The camp had a few trails to ride on, so I decided to take one. As I was riding my bike, I stopped, looked over the ledge at a few alligators that I had spotted. I heard a rustling in the trees and thought maybe it was a gator, so I got steady on my bike and got ready to take off. As I was looking around, though, I noticed a tall, dark brown hairy figure just standing there looking at me. I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, so I looked harder at it, and it took off running. I would also like to take a note that it was running on 2 feet, not 4. I rode my bike back to my camper as fast as I could and elaborately told my mother and my sister that I had just seen a Bigfoot. They both claimed I was crazy, told me it was a black bear because the camp guide told us not to leave food out. They had some of them in the area, and so black bear were very common. But I'm telling you, I am most certain that this was not a bear, because this thing stood up at least 7.5 feet tall and ran upwards on 2 feet. Bears can't do that. I knew what I saw, and ever since then, I've been fascinated with this creature. I know for sure that it's out there. A follow-up investigation report was done by Kathy Betts. I had the chance to speak to JS on the phone, and he had these details to add. In January 2001, 16-year-old JS was visiting Florida with his family. They were camped at the Hillsborough River State Park between 2 p.m. and 4 p.m. on a sunny day with a temperature at about 65 degrees. JS decides to ride his bike up a trail that parallels the Hillsborough River. About a mile or so up the trail, JS noticed a place that he recognized from a previous canoe trip, so he stopped to see if there were still some alligators there that he had spotted earlier. He says this: "I was looking down a steep embankment towards the river when I heard something rustling some bushes to my right. I thought it might be an alligator, but when I looked, I saw this big thing standing there in the bushes, just 5 feet away from me. It was frozen, just looking at me while I looked at it. Then, it took off into the bushes. It was big." JS stated that he had about 10 seconds to observe it before it ran away. I think it freaked out, and that's why it ran. When I spotted it, it was sort of standing there in the bushes, frozen, like it was wondering if I would notice it. It didn't seem like it wanted to hurt me. I think I scared it as much as it scared me. After the creature ran off, JS stated that he got back onto his bike and pedaled faster than I've ever pedaled before. It took me until halfway back to camp to really realize that I'd just seen a Bigfoot. Then, I began thinking, what if it's chasing me and steps out of the woods to clothesline me? But it never did. Deep down inside, I knew that it did not want to hurt me, but I was pretty scared by then. When I got back, I told my mom and sister that I had seen a Bigfoot. They explained to me that I probably saw a bear, actually. But it wasn't a bear, because bears don't run on 2 feet. I know it was a Bigfoot. JS stated that he saw the upper half of the creature, from the chest up. It was about 6 feet tall, and this thing stood about 1.5 feet taller than I was, so about 7.5 feet. Its shoulders were incredibly broad, about 3 feet across. I didn't notice any muscle definition because the hair was so matted, but it must have been pretty muscular. I mean, those shoulders were huge. JS didn't notice any hands, and the arms were kept at its sides. It didn't pump its arms like we run. They sort of just swung. It was covered with dark brown hair that appeared very dirty and matted. And when it ran, JS did not observe any movement of its hair. It was definitely hair, not fur, but it was all matted and dirty, and didn't move much while it was running. Maybe it had been swimming in the river. Maybe that's why it looked so matted and dirty. Even the face was really dark. I couldn't tell what was hair or what was skin, because the color of its whole face was so dark. The eyes were also very dark. JS compared them to a dog's eyes when there are no whites showing. It had a smashed-in looking nose, compared it to being half human, half ape. The mouth and lips were wide and dark. There were no teeth seen. No ears were also seen. The head was elongated and oval-shaped. It was sort of pointed at the top, but not a sharp point. JS could also not determine a gender, and there was no odor present. It didn't make any sounds when it ran away, except for the breaking of limbs. JS also told me that he wished there was somebody else there with him when he had a sighting. Then, they would have believed me. I found his story to be very credible and believable. He was sincere, forthright, and did not attempt to embellish any details through expression or story. The sighting took place in the Hillsborough State Park, which is a 16,000-acre watershed that borders about another 10,000 acres of other wilderness and protected areas. It is part of an established wildlife corridor that extends from South Florida all the way to North Florida. Rich in wildlife, the terrain topography consists of swamps, pinelands, hardwood forests, prairies, and grasslands, as well as the Hillsborough River and its many tributaries. It's an ideal Bigfoot sanctuary. I, a female lady, was driving on a clear day on I-75 in the afternoon on a spring day from Sarasota to Tampa, going north 65 to 70 miles an hour on the far right lane. This was also back in 2012. This would also be on the east side of I-75. I had to take an exam in Tampa the next day, so I can tell you the exact date that I was traveling. My window was slightly open on the passenger's side, just to let in fresh air. I was driving on the far right side of the highway, in a very heavily tropical wooded area, when I saw what I first thought was a man, walking fast, about 50 feet away from the highway, in like a grassy meadow, with thick brush or tropical woods behind him. As I got closer, I saw that it was not a man, but a creature that looked like a man, but with approximately 3-inch long brown hair covering its or his entire body, from head to toe. When I was about parallel to this thing, it quickly went into the brush and wooded area, then vanished. It looked like tall, thick brush or woods. The creature appeared to be a male, around, I'm guessing, 6 to 7 feet tall. His or its body was very, very thick. Thick chest, thick legs, and very wide, thick shoulders. I could see the brown body hair as it turned its whole body all at once, bent its head down, and went into the brush. It was going north, the same direction as I, and walked quickly, with wide steps, with knees bent, before it turned into the brush. As I drove off, I couldn't get over what I saw. It happened in about 30 seconds' time. My car smelt like rotten eggs, sulfur, or just a strange, awful odor for about 10 minutes after. I was not afraid. It did not look scary at all, just very strange. It happened so fast and without warning. My car window was slightly open on the passenger's side to let air in because, well, it was a nice day out. But like I said, after the sighting, that terrible odor lingered. It was something bad, and it took a little bit of time for it to go away. I have not heard any other incidents except the woman who sent in photos of an ape-like creature known as the Mayaka ape. The creature I saw that day did not look anything like those photos. What I saw looked more human-like, with a thick body, covered in brown hair. It did not look like an ape, but it did have a very terrible smell. Also, this was between 2 p.m. and 4 p.m. Clear, beautiful sunny day, about 75 degrees. There was a follow-up investigation report by BFRO investigator David Becara. I spoke with the witness by phone, and she seemed credible and sincere. Her sighting happened on her way to Tampa on a clear spring day just back in 2012. It was a nice cool day, by Florida standards, so she had her passenger side window cracked to let in fresh air. In an area near Little Manatee River State Park, she can't be sure as it was a long stretch of road, she noticed what she first thought was a man walking quickly, just 30 to 50 feet from the shoulder, heading north away from her. It was just a few feet from the woodline. As she neared the figure, she also noticed that it was covered in brown hair from head to toe. It was walking with long, purposeful strides, head and knees bent. The hair was 3 inches long, and definitely brown. She continued to describe it as much more man-like than ape-like. It had a round head like a man, and the arm length was normal, not long and down to the knees, but it was definitely covered in hair. As she came up next to it, it veered off towards the woodline, walked into the thickets, and disappeared, heading northbound. The witness never saw its face. She said that the thickets looked too dense for any man to just walk into, even for this large animal. She then noticed a very strong odor of rotten eggs / sulfur in the car, and had to roll the windows down for at least 10 minutes before it finally dissipated. She never felt any fear as she was in the car, and it never gave a reason to fear it. I was leaving St. Petersburg with the intentions of hitchhiking to Asheville, North Carolina. I had a friend drop me off at the I-75 North exit around 11 p.m. There was a lot of construction going on. Since it was getting late, I decided to camp for the night. I walked to the bridge that crosses the nearby river. I was planning on sleeping under the bridge, so I walked down underneath. I got myself somewhat comfortable. Then, I heard a couple of noises to the left of me, coming from the southbound bridge. I just played it off as a possum, or maybe a raccoon. Then, I heard it again. So, I decided to move closer to the river and hang my hammock in between 2 trees. I was texting people, then called my friend and talked to her, until about 2:30. Then we got off the phone since it was about to die. I went to sleep pretty quickly afterwards, but not for long. I wake up to a noise down by the river to my left. It was this weird cough grunt. I can't really explain it. I can't even mimic the sound, but I only heard it once. 10 to 15 minutes goes by and I hear another sound. This time, it's a low whistle from my right, next to the tree line. It lasts for 5 or 6 seconds, so I continue to lay there in silence. Another 10 to 15 minutes goes by and I start hearing rocks being thrown at me. This happened 5 or 6 times, every couple of minutes or so, followed by more silence. Not sure how long it lasted, but it was followed by the loudest crash I have ever heard in my life. I thought the tree I had tied my hammock to cracked. I nearly fell out. It sounded like thunder, gunshot, dynamite going off in my face. After that, I made up my mind to leave. I quickly packed up my hammock, headed back up the hill, crossing the bridge, and I caught a quick whiff of a skunk. Well, a skunk-like smell, I should say, and I could even feel a set of eyes on me. After that, I just decided that I would catch a bus back to North Carolina. There was a follow-up investigation done by Ormond Beach. This witness originally called in his report and left a voicemail message. I was able to call him back, interview him, and had him report his encounter via the website. The witness was hitchhiking from St. Petersburg, Florida, to North Carolina. A friend had given him a ride to a location and dropped him off at approximately 11 p.m. Having nothing but a backpack and hammock, he walks further up I-75 and finds a location under a bridge, thinking he would just stay there for the night. It was now after 2 a.m., and while speaking on his phone, he heard a very low whistle. He thought it unusual to hear a bird at that time of night. He even attempted to recreate the sound to me, but concluded it was much lower in tone than he could possibly imitate. He did hear other noises, thinking they were raccoons, moved to the other side of the bridge, set up his hammock, and went to sleep. He awoke to a sound that he described to me as sounding like the raptor coughing in the kitchen from Jurassic Park. Gary Rydstrom, the man who created the raptor sound for the movie, got the sound from his neighbor's dog that had been surgically debarked. The witness was concerned as he had never heard that sound in the wild before. Shortly after that, there was another whistle. More silence. Then he realized something was throwing what seemed to be a golf ball-sized rock towards him. Suddenly, he hears a very loud tree knock. It was so close and loud that the witness thought one of the trees in his hammock was attached to had broken. He compares the sound as loud as a gunshot. At the time, he felt incredibly threatened, packed up and left the area. While leaving, he smelt a skunky odor, and like so many other witnesses, describes or felt as if he was being watched as he left. The witness was so intimidated by the encounter, he decided to travel by bus for the remainder of his journey. He wanted me to know that he was backpacked many times throughout his life and never experienced a night such as this. Investigator Marion Gant and I actually inspected the area 2 days after the encounter took place. We did find evidence of 2 Sasquatches. However, not all found evidence discovered will be shared. The area is surrounded by miles of forest. A power line easement is very close. It is thought that the Sasquatches might make use of the clearing of the easements to travel along. Several prints and 2 sizes were found. There were also several tracks of prints, morning or evening. We saw huge supplies of other food sources for Sasquatch too. We did not find any rocks in the area that could have been thrown, but found several large apple snail shells that were possibly thrown at the witness. Behind where the witness's hammock was is a huge big boy trail. This is a game trail that is much taller than what a normal game trail is. When something as tall as a squatch walks through the woods, the branches and trees are bare and broken up high to accommodate them. Marion and I agree that the witness was preventing one or both of these Sasquatches from traversing to the other side of the bridge, thus leading to the acts of aggression he. In May of 1985, on a sunny afternoon, a realtor in Ormond Beach took me north on Beach Street. We turned left and entered the village of Pine Run. Before reaching the area of houses, I spotted what looked like a young preteen holding a tall stick vertically. Suddenly, the other than human walked on hands and feet to the middle of the road and then stood erect. My realtor slammed on the brakes and cried, "What is that?" I suggested a bear, but the shape and the head was not that of a bear. We agreed it was a monkey, due to no long tail, and it appeared to be at least 4.5 to 5 feet tall. Then, It disappeared into the woods. There was a small follow-up investigation report. The witness was looking to buy property in Ormond Beach back in the spring of 1985 with a realtor. Both ladies were driving a car west on Addison Drive, right around 1 p.m. That road borders a green area and connects with several other state parks. As they drove, they noticed a quote-unquote teenager standing on the roadside, holding a stick. As they neared, it drops down on all fours, and they thought out loud that it was a bear. It began across the road, from left to right, in front of them, acting totally unafraid. They had to slam on their brakes not to hit it. One commented that it was the strangest looking bear they had ever seen. And then the bear stood up and became clearly bipedal, very comfortably. It looked at them as it crossed about 10 feet in front of the car in a slow, easy gait. Once it passed the car, it dropped back down to quadrupedal and briefly paused to look back at them before going back into the woods. It was roughly 4.5 to 5 feet tall, woolly dark brown, and looked more ape than human. It had long limbs and looked taller because of the lankiness. One lady compared it to the size and weight of an average 12-year-old boy, although its head seemed smaller. The head didn't have as much hair on it as the body did. The women were amazed at what they were seeing, and the realtor commented that she was worried about what her client was thinking as to what wild creatures lived in the area. They realized it was not a bear, but could not figure out what it could have been. It did not have the bear ears or tail, and it was too big to be a monkey, and clearly was not a gorilla. They had heard that Bigfoots were much bigger, so didn't think of that either. They never considered that it could have been a juvenile Sasquatch or a juvenile skunk ape. Juvenile Sasquatch or skunk ape behavior has been reported many times to go from quadrupedal to bipedal and back. They have also been described as looking more ape-like than full-grown Sasquatch. This location actually borders Tomica State Park, Addison State Park, and Bolo Creek State Park. In fact, Bolo Creek Park has had several reports over the years. This first incident occurred in the fall of 1998. The witnesses were sleeping around 10 p.m. when they were awakened by two loud vocalizations. The first was more of a loud growl. The second began low and progressed to a higher pitch. It sounded like a scream. The witnesses related that it sounded as if whatever made the sounds was standing in the room with them. It was so loud. They said you could feel it. The husband got up to investigate, but found nothing. He said that his two dogs were very scared, and they would not move from where they were laying in the house. The husband stated that, "I couldn't have pried them off the floor with a spatula." The second incident occurred in October of 1999, roughly 13 months later. The wife let their dogs out in that morning. The dog involved did not return as she usually does, so the wife went out to look for her. At the bottom of the front steps, she found the dog bleeding from the stomach area. The wife took the mixed breed dog to the vet. The vet stated that the dog had been hit by something big, such as a car or something. The witness said that this dog had never went to the street, which, at the time, was approximately 200 yards away from the house. The dog weighed 25 pounds. The injuries included massive internal injuries and a 1.5-inch cut on her stomach. The vet said that it was a puncture wound of some sort, and also the dog's rib was broken. Unfortunately, the dog died. The witness believes that the dog walked up on a Bigfoot and was kicked by the creature. The cut on her stomach could have been where its toenail had cut her. A follow-up investigation report provided even more horrifying information. On Friday, March 17th, 2000, the witness called with an incident that had just occurred during Bike Week on Wednesday, March 8, 2000, with some friends and himself. The group was sitting around the fire pit on the northeastern corner of the property when they heard something large moving through the woods nearby. The fire was large and bright, and they saw the reflection of one eye. The reflection was red, and the eye was approximately 1.5 inches around. The creature, from position of the eye, was on their side of the creek, which runs along the north side of the property, then crossed over the creek and walked around east of them. It then came back towards them. It even made loud noises moving through the woods, snapping branches, etc. The eye was easily 7+ feet off the ground. The witness stated that the eye was too big in diameter to belong to an owl. No footprints were ever found. First of all, I am a 57-year-old high school and college psychology and humanities teacher with a background in phenomenon research. I hold 2 master's degrees, and I have often been nicknamed the resident skeptic because I simply demand scientific principles in real time for all observable data. I despise hoaxes. My wife and I were standing on a boardwalk on a bright moonlit night around 11:30 p.m. back in June of 2001. I was looking north when I first saw it about 100 yards away. At first, I thought it was just a late-night jogger. After it got about 50 yards closer to me, I alert my wife to turn around because I realized that this was not your average jogger. It walked with a very smooth, long stride, arms swinging about 2 feet in front and back. It was a uniform solid black or brown in color. No light face, hands, or shoes. We watched it walk south-right at the edge or the surf southward until it disappeared down the beach, and I am quite sure that it saw us. I thought about yelling or encountering it, but the thought lasted for just 2 seconds. This thing was walking fast, with a deliberate stride and a slight forward stance. It was on a mission, as it were. There were no footprints because it was walking slightly into the water. I know what I saw, and my wife and I are in complete agreement on all details. I guess this is another incident where I can only report the data. There seems to be no way to research it, unless someone else happened to see it or confront it. I also noticed that in the local paper, an article about a lady who discovered a black bear on her patio a few days before we arrived. I at first wondered if it was the same bear, but quickly eliminated this possibility because of its quick, upright posture. Look, I'm an avid hunter and fisherman from Kentucky. I have seen 2 black bears in the wild, at least. This was no comparison. My friend and I were spotting gators one night in Ormond Beach, Florida, when we had an encounter with something, well, unknown. We were near a lake when we heard something large in the woods, right behind us. When we shone our lights into the woods to see what was making the noises, we heard a series of blunt beating noises, about a second or 2 apart. The sound was like that of a wooden baseball bat hitting a tree over and over. This went on from about 30 seconds to a minute before the tree fell. As we heard the crackling of the falling tree, we ran back towards the nearest safe place to us. At the same time, we heard in the woods to our left something almost stalking and following our every move. Once we got to civilization and realized we were now out of danger, we then decided to go back to find out the source of what had happened. When we returned, nearly an hour later, we found a tree freshly broken in half. The break being about 8 feet from the ground. The break was also not a clean cut, like that of a saw, an axe, or a hatchet. rather like the tree had been bent to its breaking point. We knew this was a fresh break from the dripping sap, which next day was so dry, it was definitely the source of the noise of a falling tree. On a branch about 7 feet from the ground, we found a hair sample. The hair is still yet to be identified. The best description we can give it is a 2 to 2.5 inch light brown hair, which is wavy with a kink close to the middle of it. The tree was about 25 to 30 feet tall, and the break was about 7 to 8 feet in the air. At waist, the diameter is about 10 inches, and the break being between 6 and 8 inches. Please, help us to determine if this was from a known and indigenous species, or if it was our distant friend. As of November 25th, 2012, a new report was now added to this. While walking down the dock, the woods next to the dock began moving and shaking violently. We were scared, but assuming it could be a bum, we shouted off into the woods. Eventually, the shaking stopped, and a few moments go by. We heard a knocking sound. It sounded like a 4x4 sized piece of wood hitting a tree. The knocking went on for several minutes, and we continued to yell, trying to figure out what it was. Next, the scariest part. A tree about 25 to 30 feet from the dock began rocking violently. Still screaming, the tree fell toward the dock, and we began running. The whole time, we heard something keeping pace parallel to us on the dock and grunting. We later went back and found a brown red hair hanging from the bottom of a branch. The hair, obviously, later in the week, we returned with another person and to plant a cantaloupe on the tree in question. We then heard a loud wheezing noise, which sounded close to a boar being startled in its sleep. The cantaloupe was later found completely dug out, with the shell still perfectly intact. The hole was only about 6 inches in diameter. No other damage was done to the shell. I do know of a lady who had moved to the area. She and a realtor were looking for properties when a large ape-looking man ran out in front of the road. When the realtor honked the horn, it stood up on its hind legs, looked at the two women, and ran off into the woods. This was about 20 years ago. I've heard of this locally.